this talk that we're having now will go up for subscribers on Monday, the 3rd of June. On Sunday, the 2nd of June, which is tomorrow, I'm going to post the memo that you saw from me, in which I reflect on my experience at that synagogue and related questions about the atmosphere that we're in for voicing opinion about the conflict in Gaza and how it is, to some degree, taking your reputation in your hands to pretty much say anything about it. One side or the other will condemn you for this or that. And the incentives that creates to just trim your sails and not say what you think, and how I find that to be unacceptable and so on. So I make something of a declaration in the statement that was posted on Sunday, and people will be hearing us talk about it. And you've seen the statement in advance. The talk was in January of this year, but the invitation came months before October 7th of 2023. And the topic set for me was to address whatever happened to the partnership between Blacks and Jews, that's Americans. And I did address that subject, but I did not say anything about the conflict in Israel, Gaza, and regretted that I didn't, but didn't because I didn't want to say anything that might offend the sensibility of the congregation.
Yeah. I read the statement and I agreed very much with what you said about the conflict in Gaza. But then you mentioned in the statement that you didn't say anything. You didn't express these views of yours, and that afterwards you felt ashamed by that. That was the word you used, was ashamed. And I was really surprised to see that you expressed shame that you hadn't said anything about it. And then I did actually watch the talk.
I'm not used to giving speeches in synagogues. Although many of my best friends are Jewish.
And I have to say that after I watched it, I understood better why you felt a sense of shame. And I'm saying this with nothing but affection and admiration. I'm not being high-minded about it, but I understood better.
But tell me why.
The talk is about, what happened to the relation between Blacks and Jews. And there's a very nice and moving opening by Paul Lyon, who, along with his wife, I guess, funds these events. And he talks about growing up in the Bronx in a community that was like 99.9999% Jewish.
Excuse me, that's Paul Levy. I just want to correct the record. His name is Paul Levy.
Paul Levy, sorry. And he talks about, the commitment, the particularly, born in 47, memorable commitment of people in this community to civil rights. And then, relations get more complicated. And so then you are talking about two sources of this fractured relationship between Blacks and Jews in the United States. And the first, I was familiar with your views about this, about affirmative action and DEI and quotas and the unease among a bunch of American Jews, including progressive Jews. I mean, Michael Walzer, for example, about affirmative action.
Affirmative action has led to a situation where large numbers of middle-class, well-educated, upwardly mobile, racially conscious Blacks have been thrust into the highly competitive academic and professional environments in which Jews have flourished for decades, and in which Jews are vastly, quote, overrepresented. In such competition, Blacks often fare poorly.
And then the second source is Israel-Palestine.
Points to what I see as the other principal source of our current difficulties, what might be called conflicting nationalisms. Among Jews, the political ideology of Zionism has given birth in the Middle East to a new, specifically Jewish nation state, continuing to live in conflict with its neighbors, but representing a beacon of hope and a source of identity for all world Jewry.
I thought, oh, okay. And I'm going to simplify this. Israel, you present as kind of an outpost of the West in a tough neighborhood. You don't say an outpost of the West as in settler colonialist, but it's an outpost of the West, which is something that you affirmatively identify with.
Right.
And then you talk about a sensibility, particularly maybe prominent among Black, intellectuals or some
Hmm.
elites in the United States, which is a kind of third worldist, anti-colonialist sensibility that leads to an identification of the Black struggles in the United States with anti-colonialist struggles, and that leads to an identification with the plight of Palestinians. Is that a fair?
That's very
That's
fair.
what. And at no point in the whatever it was, 7 or 8 minutes, or at the total talk was about 20 minutes. At no point in the talk did you express any misgivings at all about the conduct of the war which in the memo you describe as not a genocide, but uncomfortably close to it. But you didn't say any of that in the thing. And then I thought, if I'm in the audience there and I hear what Glenn Loury is saying with characteristic eloquence and intellectual power, and there's nothing about that, what I think I would come away with from that is that you have no criticism of the war. So the self-censorship wasn't just, I'm not going to talk about this. The self-censorship, I think, probably left in the minds of a bunch of people in the audience the thought, oh, I see, Glenn Loury agrees with us about this. I mean, I'm making a presumption about the people in the audience that they would resist the views that you express in your memo about this being, a horror and it has to stop and it's a near genocide. And then, and this goes back to your wonderful 1994 paper about the consequences of self-censorship, which is what that does is leave the people who are expressing the views that you have about the conflict, it leaves that in the hands of people who are more hostile to Israel, more, in some cases, maybe, this is overdone, but in some cases, maybe more plausibly accused of being anti-Semitic than you, which is a theme in the 1994, that beautiful 1994 paper of yours about political correctness. So I thought the reason that you're ashamed was that you talked about the topic and didn't say anything about this thing, and that self-censorship may well have left a misimpression in people's minds that you agreed with them, and that the only people who really disagree with them are people who are not in any way aligned with their values and concerns. Is that a fair?
I think that's an astute observation. It fits well with the logic of my argument in that essay, which is basically a signaling argument. People don't know what you think, but they come to conclusions about what you think based on what you say. And if the people who have complex and nuanced views, which include perhaps criticism of Israel's conduct of the war in the case at hand, don't speak, then the only ones who will be engaged in that criticism are going to be people with relatively extreme views that are not necessarily creditable. But that then makes it even harder for anybody who has nuanced views to speak out because they'll be identified with the extremes, and that becomes an equilibrium,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And that certainly is part of it. I mean, I had set myself up to have a colloquy with the congregation about this sensitive matter, but I blinked, or I choked, or I held my tongue. And part of the shame comes from knowing that that's a socially unproductive way to conduct my office as a social critic. But part of it comes from knowing that the motives for my reticence were ones of concern that I'd engender a backlash in certain quarters that would be unpleasant or even harmful to my professional and personal, you know. I mean, I go to a dinner party and I won't name my friend who is Jewish and who is a fervent Zionist, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some of my best friends are Zionists, and, you know, I don't talk to my friend about what I think about what's going on. I mean, in the interest of avoiding conflict and damage to our relationship. But what kind of friendship is that we can't actually talk about these matters? And He gets not to know that his dear friend, whom he admires for many reasons, may disagree with him about this or that, and that the tension of that disagreement is potentially productive and maybe even nurturing of the friendship in the long run. But
Yeah.
it has to be tested, and it requires
Yeah.
courage. And on that particular occasion, I did not exhibit the courage that I thought was called for. I was ashamed of that.
What do you think you could have said in that context? Because there's a related set of issues here about the nature of this kind of presentation where you're trying to, it's not just a profession of faith. This is what I think. I mean, you're trying to engage people and they think similarly, in some ways different from you in other ways. You're engaged in an act of public engagement and discussion, not personal statement of faith. So what do you think you could have said?
Okay. Something like, look, I'm your friend, not your enemy. I have great admiration for the project, which is manifest in the establishment and of the state of Israel and the aspirations of the Jewish people. But that is coming with a cost. It's a political problem for which there's only a political solution. Even people like me who are basically on your side are made to chafe and recoil at the cost that's being borne by people who really didn't do anything to deserve it.
Yeah.
And you need to know that, again, notwithstanding the basic affiliation and affirmation that a person like me would want to make, some of us are having qualms here, and more than qualms, and some of us are recoiling in disgust at what we see, and some of us are losing faith in the integrity of this project that we admire and that is historically an imperative. And the politics of this situation needs to move, two-state solution, whatever you want to call it. But there's got to be some space given to the humanity and the legitimacy of the aspirations of the Palestinian Arabs who are under your dominion. I'm in your corner, kind of, but not uncritically so, not without reservation, not without qualm, not without a sense of foreboding that you're on a slippery slope to a very bad place, something like that.
Yeah. And here's what I think is complicated and interesting about this and about the nature of public discussion, public engagement, which is what you just said is not that different from the kind of things that Tom Friedman has been saying, or Senator Schumer says Netanyahu should step aside. And among other reasons, Netanyahu should step aside because there is only one plausible solution to this, which is a two-state solution, and Netanyahu is opposed to that. So in the moment, in this situation, there are those kinds of things. And so why, what is it about this issue or your circumstances, who you are, that led you to think, well, I can't, I can't go there and I can't even invoke these. And I'm asking this partly because I feel a lot of reticence on this issue. I don't have an expert knowledge of it. And I am more cautious and hesitant than on other issues. And I'm looking for help here. I'm not, why couldn't you have said as...
Let me just say for the record, I've communicated with the organizers at the synagogue, which invited me to give that address. Yeah. I appreciate that you took time to listen to what I had to say there. Yeah. And I shared with them the statement that I posted Sunday, the 2nd of June, about this whole matter. And they said, man, I wish you had spoken your mind. No problem. No problem. We don't expect everybody to agree with everything. No problem. And if you want to come back and have a debate with, Douglas Murray or some other prominent pro-Zionist voices about this matter, we're happy to invite you back and to host that debate and let the chips fall where they may. They said, what are you worried about? It's okay, man. It's okay. So now I do have to acknowledge that some of my sensitivity about exposing myself as I have just done, and as I do in the statement that we put up on the 2nd of June.
Yeah.
Some of my sensitivity comes from reading the comments at my newsletter and in my Substack. When I had John Mearsheimer on, you know who John Mearsheimer is, of course. I had him on, and he was talking mostly about Ukraine, not about Gaza, but he's been very, very outspoken about Israel, Gaza, and he's not a friend of the current Israeli government or of the Zionist project. I think you'd have to say that about Mearsheimer. He thinks Israel is in trouble. He thinks it's dragging the U.S. down in terms of global opinion about what's going on. So, I had Omer Bartov, the historian. You may not know him, but he is a historian of the Holocaust. He's Israeli, and he's been very, very critical of Israel's conduct of its relationship on the West Bank and in Gaza and so on.
Yeah.
And then the feedback that I get in the comments of people who are tearing into me and who have a long list of voices on the other side that, Glenn, I would wish that you would do this or that. And, it makes me feel like this is a third rail type issue, and I'd be best to avoid it altogether or to sit back and let the two sides have at each other and not to have any opinion whatsoever.